Hi everyone, this is Sarfraz from Aristotle Prep, and we are looking at question 83 from the OG 13 Critical Reasoning chapter. Now, this is a very interesting argument we are looking at, one that I like a lot, and that most students get wrong, by the way. And the interesting part is, if you ask students, normally if students get a particular argument wrong and you ask them, did you find it difficult? They will say, yes, it looks very, very difficult. In this particular case, if you ask students after they've given you the answer, what difficulty level do they think the argument was of, they will say it was a very easy argument or pretty much manageable because they got the answer pretty quickly and they'll be very sure of their answer. And such questions tend to be the most difficult when you are absolutely sure of what you're doing and what you're doing is wrong. Because you see, if the argument looks difficult to you, you will spend some time over it, you will double check your answers. But if you are absolutely sure of what you're doing, then you won't even realize that you marked the answer wrong. You will come back and tell me or tell your teacher that I think I did very well in the exam, I don't know why I got a low score. And this is the reason you got a low score, because you got such tricky questions where you think you are doing everything correctly, but you're actually doing everything incorrectly. Happens a lot. Happens on critical reasoning, happens on sentence correction, also happens on reading comprehension. So anyway, enough of background. Let's come back to the argument and read the stimulus. The stimulus says, many people suffer an allergic reaction to sulfites, to certain sulfites, including those that are commonly added to wine as preservatives. Simple statement, okay. However, since there are several winemakers who add sulfites to none of the wines they produce. I think it's such an interesting way of writing it. It says there are several winemakers who add sulfites to none of the wines they produce. The simpler way of writing would have been there are several winemakers who do not add sulfites to any of their wines. That would have been much easier to understand, but the GMAT likes to complicate things. So it says, however, since there are several winemakers who add sulfites to none of the wines they produce, which means they don't add any sulfites to their wines, people who would like to drink wine but are allergic to sulfites can drink wines produced by these winemakers without risking an allergic reaction to sulfites. The argument actually looks absolutely watertight to me when I read it, because it says there are people who are allergic to sulfites. Sulfites are added to wine. There are some winemakers who do not add sulfites to their wines. So people who are allergic to sulfites can happily drink these wines without getting any allergic reaction to sulfites. It makes perfect sense to me. There's no way I can actually come up with an assumption in my mind. And the question is asking you which of the following is an assumption on which the argument depends. I have no idea. It looks perfect to me. So what I'll do is I'll go through the options, because there must be something which is so obvious that I haven't noticed it. So the first option says, these winemakers have been able to duplicate the preservative effect produced by adding sulfites by means that do not involve adding any potentially allergenic substances to their wine. Some people do think this is the answer, but the point is, why would I assume something on these lines? I mean, see, the argument, be very careful of the last sentence. People who are allergic to sulfites can drink wines produced by these winemakers without risking an allergic reaction to sulfites. So the argument is not talking about allergic reactions in general, but only allergic reactions to sulfite. If you get allergic reaction to something else which is there in the wine, so be it. That doesn't come under the purview of the argument, which immediately eliminates A, because it might involve adding some other potentially allergenic substance. As long as it is not sulfite, the argument holds true. So A can't be the answer. B says, not all forms of sulfite are equally likely to produce the allergic reaction. Are we trying to weaken the argument? Because that's what B does. So it's not the assumption by any stretch. C says, wine is the only beverage to which sulfites are commonly added, makes no difference to us. D says, D is the other popular answer. D says, apart from sulfites, there are no substances commonly present in wine that give rise to an allergic reaction. As I said, it's a very popular answer, and now I'm sure you know why it is wrong, because as I said, the argument is only limited to allergic reaction to sulfites. Other substances are of no use to us, are of no consequence to us. So D is not the assumption in the argument, E is the assumption in the argument. Sulfites are not naturally present in the wines produced by these winemakers in amounts large enough to produce an allergic reaction. You see, the argument is saying these winemakers are not adding sulfites. Fair enough. From that, can I conclude that people who are allergic to sulfites can have these wines? What if sulfites are naturally present in those wines. So the winemaker is not adding anything, yet the wine contains sulfites. Then if that poor fellow has that wine, he will definitely get an allergic reaction. So you see, there's no way I could have thought of this earlier. But when you look at this option, it immediately strikes me that absolutely correct. This has to be an assumption in the argument. So E is the answer to the question. If you negate E, the argument will absolutely fall apart. It's a very tricky argument, as I said, because one tends to overlook the scope. The scope is there in the last two words of the argument: allergic reaction to sulfites only, not to any other substance. You could have allergic reaction to peanuts. That is not within the purview of the argument. So a tough question. It's a very tricky question if you ask me. I would give it a 4.5 out of 5 on a difficulty scale of 1 to 5. It's a very, very tricky question. Have a nice day.